Hi, everybody. We are doing the second part of Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is Sustaining Biodiversity with an Ecosystem Approach, meaning how do we protect the world? How do we protect the animals? How do we protect um, all of the species? But we're protecting whole ecosystems, not just, say, the monarch butterfly. We're protecting the whole ecosystem. And so for 8.2, we're going to talk about grasslands, protecting grasslands and prairies and such. And lesson 3 is protected lands like state parks, national parks, and like the place like the Amazon forest, things of that sort. So those are protected lands. So let's go ahead and get this rolling. In 8.2, again, this is grasslands. See, like prairies. All right. The objectives are going to be to identify the ecosystem services provided by the grasslands, meaning what does Mother Nature give us through the grasslands? And if you remember, the prairies, they're called our breadbasket. They have very fertile soil. We're going to define rangelands and pastures, tell the difference between the two, and explain how overgrazing impacts these. Again, rangelands and pastures, we're feeding our animals, our livestock, and they're going to eat up all of this grass. So how does overgrazing impact the areas? And then we're going to talk about methods for managing the rangelands to help uh, eliminate those needs, eliminate the damage, and to limit the impacts of overgrazing and help preserve these grasslands. Again, we're going to find out the difference between rangeland and pasture, and we're going to talk about what overgrazing is and what it does. All right, so grasslands cover about 1/4 of the Earth's landmass. Think about the whole Earth divided in fourth. That 1/4 of the whole Earth is grasslands. They get very important ecosystem services, including soil formation, erosion control, nutrient cycling, storage of atmospheric carbon in biomass, meaning it pulls the carbon out of the air and puts it in actual grasses and stuff, and then maintaining biodiversity. So there are 5 important, where's my map? There are 5, make sure you can list all 5 of the important ecosystem services that grassland gives us. They're right here. Other than forests, the grasslands are the most widely used and altered ecosystems. So section 1, we talked about forests and protecting those. Grassland is the next most widely used and changed ecosystem because, again, this soil is incredibly fertile and it's great for growing things. So we've bulldozed most of it to make farms, and that's part of the problem. So rangelands are these unfenced, over here where the cattle can run free, unfenced grasslands in temperate and tropical climates. Temperates means up here in the middle of the earth, and tropical, of course, down by the equator, that supply forage or vegetation for grazing. Now, if you call the animal grazing, that means they're eating grass, and browsing animals eating shrubs. So if you have kind of a mix back and forth, like the cows are going to eat grasses and the goats are going to eat shrubs. So if you mix and match, you're going to get everything just pretty much bulldozed down. Livestock can also graze in pastures, which are managed grasslands. So rangelands are unfenced, pastures are managed or fenced. That's basically the difference. Do you have a fence or you don't have a fence? Fenced meadows that are often planted with domestic grasses or other forage crops like alfalfa and clover. So they'll plant especially because the animals really, really love alfalfa and clover. Another thing that's really good about alfalfa and clover, they add nitrogen back into the soil. So it's really good to plant that for the livestock you have on these pastures. Cattle, sheep, and goats all graze on about 42% of the Earth's grasslands. So we just said that grasslands cover 1/4 of the Earth. And then we just said the animals are grazing on 42%. So that's almost half of that 1/4. So take the Earth, divide it in 1/4. That much of the Earth is grassland. Divide that in half. That much of it has animals on it. The other half is like savannas and stuff that doesn't have the human livestock, like the giraffes, zebras, and stuff, wildebeest. They're going to be grazing on it, but they're not human owned. So 42% are human owned grazers. At 2005, the UN Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, that's a thing that they did checking out the world. They did a 4-year study by let's say 1,300 experts from 95 countries. That's a lot. Okay, they estimated the number could increase by 70% in 2050. So as we go through right now, about half of our grassland is already being grazed. By 2050, it may be all the way up to 70%. Now, once you put cattle on this stuff, it is not natural anymore. The native grasses are going to be gone. I'm going to show you the difference in these native grasses, the grasses that belong on the grasslands and the prairies, as opposed to what we're putting there. But if we increase the number of livestock up to 70% on our grasslands, again, we do that because there are so many freaking humans on the planet. We need to feed everybody. But if we do that, we're going to really, really damage that biome, that ecosystem. So let's look again at this picture. If it's on, I think 250, if you want to see a closer picture. Um, yeah, 250. So we want to know the biggest difference in the two sides here. If you take the cattle off of here, what would the grassland do? But if it remains indefinitely, what's going to happen? And what methods could be used to prevent overgrazing in this pasture? So think about it. Again, it is a pasture because it's fenced. Okay. Uh, this so again, what can we do to keep the cattle from eating this all up? The blades of grassland grow from the base, so the grass actually grows from down here, not at the tip as broadleaf plants do. So as long as the upper portion of the blade is eaten and the lower portion remains in the ground, rangeland grass is a renewable resource. If the animals are eating this top part, they're fine. It can grow and 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 grow. Look at this root structure. Okay, this root structure is what holds the soil together to keep the soil from eroding. All right, so having the animals on here is actually really good for the grass as long as it is native grass. Native grasses that are designed to grow like this. Our modern grasses have a lot more shallow root system, and so when the cattle graze it, it has a lot less roots for growing back, and it won't hold on to the soil. So moderate levels of grazing, if you're using this native grasses, is actually encouraged because removal of the mature vegetation stimulates rapid growth and encourages greater plant diversity. So as long as the upper portion is eaten and the lower portion remains, it can be used again and again and again. It's actually good for it. But what's happening, moderate grazing can be beneficial, but overgrazing, see, that's where we get into the problem. Overgrazing occurs when there's too many animals grazing for too long and it damages the grasses and the roots. If we're just eating those top parts of the grasses, it'll be fine. If there's too many animals, they're going to start eating it down to the roots, and then we've got a problem. This leads to soil erosion, compaction, reduced water retention, and the invasion of undesirable plants. Again, when I list things like this, count them up and make sure you're ready for a question that asks, list me so and so and so. The Food and Agriculture Organization estimates that overgrazing has already diminished the productivity of a substantial portion of the world's rangeland. Like I said, if the animals just eat the top, it can grow back and grow back and grow back. But if the animals eat it all the way down, this is what it's talking about, diminished productivity. They've eaten it all the way down and it's not growing back as it should. That's the problem. So we've already, a big portion has already been lost of our rangelands. The overgrazing, here's our definition. Again, the official definition occurs when too many animals graze an area for too long. Look at this. See, they've eaten it down to the nubs. There's nothing left here. It damages the grasses and their roots by exceeding the area's carrying capacity. Remember, we learned carrying capacity several chapters ago. It means how much the earth can sustain. The overgrazing reduces grass cover, exposes the topsoil to erosion like a big wind and this stuff, or rain. This soil is blowing off of here. Water or wind, and it compacts the soil. The cattle sitting on there squishes the soil down, and it's hard to hold water and hard for the roots to grow to try to reestablish itself. Also, overgrazing promotes the invasion of species like sagebrush, mesquite, cactus, cheatgrass. Once you eat it down to there, these are the grasses that will grow in that crapped up soil, but the cattle won't eat that. So you have to continually find more space and more space and more space to feed them with. And then they wind up damaging more and more and more of the prairies. So the FAO, remember that's the Federal Food. We just said it. I can't roll backwards in the middle of a tape, but we got this. All right, so the FAO has estimated that overgrazing by livestock has reduced productivity by as much as 20% of the world's rangelands. I told you, it's not because they've eaten it too far down, it can't grow back. And so this question, how does overgrazing impact soil health? I just answered it on the last slide. And why is it likely that the area of grazed land is predicted to increase by 70? And I told you that one back on a couple of slides ago. So answer these questions as we go through. We just talked about it, so you should be able to do that. All right, so how do we protect them? How do we protect these rangelands? Sustainable rangeland management involves several key practices. Again, we've got us a list. Okay, make sure you're ready for lists. Controlling grazing time and frequency, selecting appropriate livestock for the vegetation, and limiting the number of grazing animals to stay within carrying capacity. So let's talk about this first one. Controlling grazing time and frequency. Depending on what season of the year, if this grass is trying to grow early in the spring, you need to let it grow and keep the animals off of it, that kind of stuff. And how frequently you graze this area. You need to give it, like, graze this area this year, and then graze this area the next year, and graze this area the next year, in order to give them time to rebuild. So that's what I mean by frequency. Selecting the appropriate livestock for the vegetation. If you have a bunch of, remember we talked a minute ago about how cattle is going to eat grasses and goats are going to eat shrubs. And that's okay. That's maintainable within a certain amount. But if you put a grass place with a bunch of goats, again, they're going to eat shrubs. If you put them in a bunch of grass, they're going to eat everything. So you got to pick the right livestock for the vegetation that you have, and then limit the number of grazing animals to stay within carrying capacity. If that pasture or that rangeland will hold 20 cows, don't put 50 on there. Okay, it makes that's just sense. And then rotational grazing, like I said, is, you range here for a while, there for a while, there for a while. So you use temporary fencing to move the livestock between areas to prevent overgrazing. You don't have to fence the whole area, and you don't have to build permanent fences. You can build temporary fences, leave them here for a couple of weeks, pull up those fences, put them over here, leave them here for a couple of weeks. Especially in sensitive riparian zones. Do you see how I highlighted that? I don't think that's one of your vocabulary words, but it is a word you need to know. I may stick it on the vocabulary list. Yep. I might stick it on the vocabulary list. Riparian zones are areas around streams and rivers. So these obviously are going to be very, very, very well grazed, because can you imagine if you're a cow or a horse or a goat or a sheep or something, you get thirsty. You're going to go down by the stream. Well, then you might walk back up the hill, but then you're thirsty again, so you're going to walk back down the stream. They're just going to stay by the stream. So those are the areas that are going to get overgrazed really, really quickly. All right, what is it called? Riparian zones. I need to put myself a note to add that to your vocabulary list because it's important. Okay, and then of course, if you fence off damaged areas to allow natural restoration, if like you saw on the last slide where the cows had eaten it down to nothing, you need to fence that area off to allow it to regrow. All right, so while method, now you can use herbicides. Remember we said that once you clear that, if the cattle eats it down to nothing, you're going to get the wrong kind of grasses growing back. We just said that on the last slide or the one before. And you get the wrong kind of grasses growing back, and then the cattle don't like that kind of grass. So you can do stuff like herbicides or controlled burns if you wind up getting the wrong kind of grasses in there to suppress the undesirable plants. You can do controlled trampling where you have the animals over there to destroy the root system of the undesirable. It's a cheap, so you can try herbicides and controlled burns, but they get expensive or damaging. Okay, especially with the controlled burns in these kind of areas that can get out of hand really quickly. Sometimes they'll do controlled trampling while they have the animals there, just to walk all over the root systems. It's very cheap, but it's going to take some serious work as far as putting the animals there, taking them off, putting them on, taking them off. But also, this area has, the whole reason you're trying to get it trampled is the grass is not good for them to eat. So you're going to have to feed them extra while they're walking on this place you want to trample, right? Because they're not getting food here. That's why you want them to trample it. So you have to make arrangements for that. So, but it is a much cheaper alternative. And finally, the encroachment of development. Do you know the word encroachment? Okay, it means creeping up. So the encroachment of development, okay, we have these ranch lands, but the city is kind of, the built up places are kind of eating it and eating it away. Millions of people have moved into areas that were typically devoted to ranching. Like I said, if this were here near where we live, they'd put a subdivision up on this in 20 minutes. You know that they would. They'd build this whole thing up as a subdivision. Right? That's the problem. Okay, it's the encroachment of development. So millions of people have moved into areas typically devoted to ranching, and the developers have been buying up ranch lands to build housing developments, condominiums, and small little ranchettes. So the rich people get little ranchettes where they get a nice big yard, but everybody else gets condominiums and apartments and crap like that, or zero lot line houses, because they are buying everything up. So of course we can't have our natural prairies anymore because they built super malls all over everything. So this change in land use, again, buying it all up, has concerned a lot of the ranchers, ecologists, and environmentalists in the region. They've joined together to preserve a number of cattle ranches. So if the developers are going to buy them up, the conservationists buy them up too. I bought this land and I'm not letting you build anything on it. Leave it alone. I bought it, I paid for it. I mean, that's something we have to do, but it's more expensive that way. And then the developers are steady offering more money and more money. Yeah, I really want this land, more money. You can't have it. We need to keep it natural. How about this much money? We have to keep it natural. How about this much money? No, we have to keep it natural. How about this much money? Okay. And then it's gone. All right, so it's a big, big deal. So, but they have tried to buy some of this up in order to sustain the important remaining grasslands and the habitats to provide for the native species. We have land trust groups. Okay, they're getting involved. Now, these guys have money on their own. And so no amount of up in the dollar amount is going to move these guys. They pay the ranchers to establish conservation easements, meaning legally binding restrictions to ensure future owners will not develop the land. So if these guys have enough money, these land trust groups, in order to preserve it, nobody's going to try to talk them out of it. They're also pushing for local governments, okay, to zone the land in order to prevent large-scale developments and ecological fragile areas. But once you involve government, you're going to have a lot of corruption. So again, whoever's got the most money is going to win for that one. But we can try. So here's questions for you. How can ranchers protect riparian zones? What did we say riparian zones are? The areas around streams and rivers. Okay, so if the grasslands remain healthy, then. If too many animals graze in the area for too long, then. If farmers use rotational grazing, then. And the grasslands are to be preserved, then. What are we going to have to do? All right, so just fill those answers in. All right, so this is the summary of, so grasslands was pretty short, how the grasslands can be managed. So grasslands provide ecosystem services including, again, we got our list, soil formation, erosion control, nutrient cycling, storage of atmospheric carbon dioxide in biomass, and maintenance of biodiversity. The rangelands and pastures are overgrazed when too many animals graze in one area for long, so rotational grazing and limiting the amount of livestock can prevent that overgrazing. Pretty much what we have going on. Okay, so rewatch any of 8.2 that you need. We're moving on to 8.3. Alrighty, back again. So 8.2 was protecting the grasslands and prairies. 8.3 is going to be protected lands. We've already got these set aside for parks or wildlife reserves. How do we keep them protected? All right. So we're going to identify the challenge of managing national parks and other protected areas, especially in less developed countries. Again, money's a big issue here. We're going to explain the factors that place stress on the U.S. parks. So we're going to focus some on global parks, and then we're going to focus on U.S. parks. And we're going to understand how buffer zones, which I'll explain what those are, can make it easier to sustainably manage reserves. And then we're going to explain how wilderness areas are managed. How do we manage them to protect the wild species and ecosystems? We're going to learn what buffer zones are. We're going to learn about a biosphere reserve, and we're going to learn about wilderness areas. All right. So the world's parks face many challenges. These are some of the most beautiful world parks around. Like I know this one's Australia. I couldn't tell you where the rest of them are, but they're beautiful. Just beautiful. So according to the International Union of Conservation of Nature, this IUCN people, these are also the people who do the endangered and threatened species. These are really big, really big conservation group. There are over 660 let me get my numbers, 6,600 national parks worldwide. Many of them are facing challenges, though. A lot of them are too small to support the animal populations. All right, because think about it. Look, there's a camel. All right, a lot of these are too small to support the animals that need to live there. We have invasive species outcompeting native ones, like definitely in Australia, cats and rabbits. Australia has a lot of, they're known for having marsupials, the animals with the pouches, but also a lot of reptiles. All right. You get cats and rabbits, they're out reproducing everything there and taking over everything. So like invasive species are out competing the native ones. And then high visitor numbers, you get too many people. High visitor numbers can cause degradation. So we're going to talk about those things that are happening to the parks. So I'm going to do a quick little survey with you. Okay, so we're going to complete this little poll to think about the value of national parks and other protected areas. What national parks can you name? Try to think of at least 3 of them. Have you visited a national park or any other place set aside as a protective area? And if yes, tell me where it was. And how would you explain the purpose of national parks? What do you think their purpose would be? And name one thing you would expect to see or do if you visited a national park or a similar destination. What do you think you would find there if you haven't seen one yet? So these parks that are in developing countries, like we're talking about these challenges, in developing countries, they're not going to have as much money as the more developed countries. So they're going to have a lot of more poverty, a lot more people, a lot less resources. Okay, that's why they're having trouble getting developed as much as the rest of us. So let's think about that kind of country. Despite having the greatest biodiversity, they are only 1% of them protected. If you think about these kind of developing countries, they do have a lot more animals and plants and stuff than a lot of the rest of us do because we've mowed over everything. Okay, they have a lot more biodiversity, but only 1% of the parks and the areas in that are protected. The local people who live there are facing poverty. A lot of these developing countries are incredibly poor, and they may illegally enter parks for resources like fuel wood and food. Okay, and we talked about that in the last chapter, trying to protect the forests. If they're trying to get fuel to cook their food, you can't say anything about them. They're just trying to survive. But they go up into these parks and they cut everything down. They're going to get fuel wood. They're going to take food, meaning the animals and plants that are there. But you also have big companies doing illegal logging, mining, and you have poachers. Okay, poachers in these parks, in these, especially these underdeveloped or less developed countries. Um, Poaching is a lot of money, and that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to survive, and you need money to survive. So these parks also don't have a funding or staff needed for effective management. You can't get somebody out there to catch the poachers. Okay, we need effective management, we need enforcement, and we need education. Okay, and these countries don't have the money to do that kind of stuff. So going back, thinking what we've just talked about, what kind of illegal activities take place in some of these national parks? Okay, give me a list. Okay, now here we're going to focus in U.S. parks. The U.S. national parks, we have 59 major parks and a bunch of other sites, not just parks, but other things, but they have several challenges. The increased popularity has tripled the number of visitors to about 293 million. Would you like to go to a park that is that busy? That's a lot of people in the park. I want to go hear birds singing. That's why I want to go to a park. I want to hear birds singing. I want to hear water in a brook, you know. And also this damage, pollution, and noise. I would not want to go to a park that's doing this. Okay. The damage, pollution, and noise from different types of off-road vehicles are going to destroy or damage the fragile vegetation and disturb the wildlife, and then negatively affect the park experience for other visitors. That's me right there. I would hate all of this stuff. Just give me some trees and birds. I don't want any of that other stuff. Now, surrounding development threatens these parks as well through activities like mining, logging, grazing, power plants, urban developments. Traffic and pollution, okay, is going to impair the visibility of scenic views more than 90% of the time. So if you go to this certain place because they have great mountain views and all of a sudden it's covered with smog, no thanks. Covered with trash, definitely no thanks. So if we're thinking about protecting these shared spaces, the popularity of the national parks, the people are going there because they are so cool. But because the people are going there, it's threatening the ability to meet the mission of protecting the wilderness and wildlife. Okay, so people want to go to see the wilderness and wildlife, but the more people go, the less they get to see. So to try to better understand this, we're going to use this kind of a little analogy. Imagine that you've got an amazing backyard with a giant garden and a big pool and a natural uncultivated area filled with wildlife. You've got your little forest tree place back here. You've got this great pool. You've got a good garden over here that's just amazing. Your yard is so inviting that people are constantly stopping by to enjoy it. Eventually, things start to break. The garden gets trampled. The wild animals leave the wooded area because too many people are disturbing it. So with this prompt, what rules might you make in order to keep your yard in good condition but still be able to share it with your friends? All right, that's the kind of thing we're trying to look at. Okay, so think about this analogy and then see what you can do. Answer this, and then see how that's going to relate to protecting the parks. Still talking about these challenges, one of the main things happening is invasive species like wild boars and mountain goats disrupting native ecosystem. These boars are initially from Europe. They don't belong here at all. And these goats, I think, are African. They brought them here for the farms, but then they got loose and got wild. Okay, and both of these guys are going to tear up the place. And then, of course, you have illegal hunting and removing of native species. I'm not talking just, hunting, of course. Illegal hunting happens a lot. But even just removing the native species, some of these are keystone species. Okay, do you remember when we learned about keystone species? It was chapter 4. It was ages ago. But the keystone species are the ones that, by just them being there, they change the ecosystem in such a way that makes it better for everybody. One of the examples we used was alligators. Okay, they build gator ponds, and everybody else, they build a gator pond for themselves so that they can cool off in the Florida heat. But as they build these gator ponds, everybody else gets to use it. Right? So it's actually a benefit for everybody. Otters do the same thing because they eat one of the urchins that if they don't keep the urchin population under control, then the urchins are going to eat all the seaweed. So it's like these are keystone species that simply by them being there, they make it better for everybody else. We're going to use the examples of a wolf. Okay, so when we're talking about illegal hunting and removal of native species, if they are a keystone species, you're going to have a serious, serious problem. And again, we're going to use the wolves as an example. Hunting and illegal removal of the native species in nearly half the U.S. national parks, with some species. Sorry, guys, I tried to make this PowerPoint pretty fast, and I think I've got some grammar going on. Let me reread this. Oh, no, okay. Hunting and illegal removal threaten native species and in nearly half of the parks, with some species disappearing entirely. And here's my example with the wolves. The loss, especially of keystone species like the gray wolf in Yellowstone, has significantly disrupted the ecosystem. In Yellowstone, the wolves disappeared in the 20s due to overhunting. Okay, they just had parties and shot wolves and shot wolves and shot wolves, and it made them feel like a man. All right, well, yes, I mean, if they were farmers, the wolves were hunting their sheep and possibly their children. Okay, but they went overboard. Okay, but we didn't know how bad it was because we didn't realize how important the wolves were. Okay, so once the wolves were gone, all right, these elk and all the other herbivores were starting to browse these areas by the stream. What did we say areas by the stream were called? Riparian zones, because there's nobody there to chase them. They just sat here and sat here and sat here and sat here. The wolves were all gone. And so these elk, deer, moose, all these other ones were over browsing, and that increased soil erosion. You eat this down to nothing, the soil is going to get washed down into the stream. Then the streams get all messed up, and the beavers that should be here can't be here anymore. It negatively impact the other herbivores, predators, beavers, eagles, grizzly bears, foxes. The only one who liked this was the coyotes, because they increased because there was lack of competition for the wolves. So it was a big giant mess. And the aspen trees, you see this yellow up here? Yellowstone is known for aspen trees, and the aspen trees were, they thought they were dying because there weren't any at all from a certain age group, and that's how they finally figured out what was going on. Oops, I gotta push the other button to slide. So if you look at this picture here, they realized what was happening in the late 80s, early 90s. This picture here is from 1991. All right, nothing there. This same picture from 2020 after they fixed it. Do you see how the trees have regrown? The beavers were able to come back. The wolves have the elk moving. So we have everything we need now, so that the reintroduction of the wolves into Yellowstone in the mid-90s had a cascading positive effect. This word cascading, they call it trophic cascades. Because the wolf is a keystone species, what they do affects everybody else. So they call it a trophic cascades. The elk herds decreased and spread out, leading to vegetation recovery. And then the scavenger populations are going to be increasing. Okay, you wouldn't think it's a good idea to have the scavengers, but it really is, because they affect a whole bunch of other things. I have a video that I'll be showing you that goes over the details on this. So the coyote population normalized. which is good, and allowing the prey to recover, and the park's ecosystem began to rebalance once we had this done. So again, that shows you how the wolves were a keystone species, and the fact of adding them back in had a cascading effect. They call it, again, trophic cascades. How it happened affected everybody. You'll see in that video that I show you later. And once we realize how important it is, we know that we can set aside more areas for protection. The experts advocate a worldwide network of protected areas where everybody works together regardless of what country you're in. Worldwide network is the best way to preserve biodiversity because, as we said, some of these lesser developed countries don't have enough money to do the protection. If we have it worldwide, globally, then those people who can afford it can help those who can't. Currently, less than 13% of the Earth's land is protected. That is not nearly enough, and only 6% of that is strictly safeguarded. So conservation biologists urge for us to get up to at least 20% of this land protected, including a global, like we said, global system of biodiversity reserves representing all types of biomes, not just grasslands, not just forests, deserts, and water aquatic types. All types of biomes need to be represented. And again, the IUCN, those are the people who do endangered and threatened, they estimate it would cost about $23 billion annually. That is a lot. That's a lot. It's expensive. But when I talk about Costa Rica in a minute, it's worth it. Let me show you this next slide. All right, so I'm going to focus on buffer zones in Costa Rica because Costa Rica made it happen. That amount of money looks like a heck of a lot of money, but they made it work. So I'll show you how. Okay, first off, we need these buffer zones. We talked about how the local people who live in the area, they need to get their trees, they need to get their plants, they need to do the things they need to do. You can't just tell them that they can't feed their family. All right, but these buffer zones here allow the local people to use portions of this stuff. All right, and then we have a movement corridor between here that allows this stuff is kept green. They call it like greenways, so that the animals can move back and forth, and they may not stay in this area because it's not as deeply wooded as this is, but they can move back and forth and go back and forth, find mates, find food, find shelter. So these movement corridors are real important. And these buffer zones here, it involves very strictly protected inner core. Nobody touches the middle. Nobody touches the middle. Very strictly protected inner core, surrounded by an outer zone, that's the buffer zone, where the local people can sustainably use resources. They're allowed to get in there if they're careful. The UN has implemented this concept in a global network of biosphere reserves in 120 countries. Like we said, we need this to be global. We need the one organization to handle this and kind of work this through. The United Nations has handled this for us. Okay, they're getting it. We got 120 countries, but there's more that could be using it. Like we said, it was real expensive. Look at this next slide. Costa Rica did it. Okay, they use this mega reserve system, combining park cores with buffer zones. You see the cores are the green areas and the buffer zones are yellow. Do you see that? That's almost everything covered. Almost all of Costa Rica is covered with this mega reserve system. Park cores and buffer zones located, and the indigenous people sustainably use the resources. So not only are we protecting the elements, we're protecting the cultures of the indigenous people. So it's like win-win all the way around. This approach integrates local communities into conservation efforts, making them partners in protecting the biodiversity, gives them a stake in it, gives them reason to help. They wind up some of them actually make money and all sorts of stuff on this. They have their jobs with this. And so they're able to survive. They're able to protect their families. They're able to make use of these resources, and therefore they're more likely to help you protect them. The mega reserves aim to protect 80% of Costa Rica's biodiversity, which is incredible considering everybody else was like 10, 12, 15%. You know, they got 80% going. And Costa Rica's largest source of income is its $3 billion a year travel and tourism industry. So I told you this stuff's expensive. They made it work, though. This ecotourism accounts for almost 2/3 of that industry. So they are seriously making money hand over fist because they did it right. So as much as you know, the developers say, I don't want to spend that much money, save the green stuff, leave it green. Why don't I build a mall? Why don't I build shopping centers? Why don't I build superhighways? You can make money this way, a serious amount of money, so it's worth it. The biosphere reserve, we're going to look closer. Here's one in the Chihuahuan Desert. This is it's big. It's called Big Bend National Park in between Texas and Mexico. Okay, this is a biosphere reserve we have close to us. I know Costa Rica is a bit far for any of us to get to. So we're going to look closely at this photo on 254 of Big Bend National Park. It explains it's fully protected. Fully protected. It's one of the most undisturbed examples, and it's in the Chihuahuan Desert. Research and cooperative programs that run in the buffer zones. Remember, so you got a little area. So you have research and cooperative programs in the buffer zones that help develop more sustainable land use practices, including livestock grazing. Like I said, we've got to be able to feed our crazy population. So in those buffer zones, they have livestock grazing. The reserve includes land in the U.S. as well as Mexico. So think about this sentence and give me an answer. International cooperation to manage this biosphere might include. Okay, think about that, because this is part Texas and part Mexico. What do we have to do to get this worked right? All right, now we can setting aside wilderness areas. Wilderness areas are designed to protect undeveloped land from human exploitation. It's green, leave it green, keep the humans off of it. These areas are legally protected from activities like logging, mining, and construction. The U.S. Wilderness Act of 1964, this was ages ago, established the National Wilderness Preserve System and protected the area. It's increased significantly since then. So by 2012, this book was written in about 2015, we had nearly 12 times as much land as what we had in 1964. So we're setting it aside and still trying to protect it, trying to keep the money grubbers out of it. But the trouble is, only 5% of all U.S. land is protected, and more than 54% of that is in Alaska. Okay, there's not much here in the lower U.S. Almost all of it's in Alaska. Only 2.7 of the land in the lower, we're talking the dark green spots. Only 2.7 of the land in the U.S. is here, and most of that's out west. There's almost nothing around here for us. Okay, so we want to know what human activities are not allowed in the wilderness area. What can you do? What can you not do in these areas? Check back the slides. I've gone over that. Now, of course, we have arguments, right? You got the developers fighting the conservationists. The developers and resource extractors, all right, these guys, they often oppose protecting even 13% is all we've got of the whole earth. The whole earth. Only 13% is what we've got protected. And they don't even want to do that. Okay? They don't want to protect it in any form due to the potential resource value that could provide short-term economic benefits. Yes, there is money to be made here, but it's only short-term. So the ecologists are going to argue that these areas provide long-term benefits, such as, again, we've got another list going, serving as ecological insurance policy, meaning if there's some sort of catastrophe, you can have places rebuilt and the earth can recover. Creating islands of biodiversity hotspots, okay, again, protecting species, providing ecosystem services that will be necessary to support life, like the trees giving us oxygen, okay, it's real important, and to be essential as areas of future evolution in response to changing climate conditions. The earth is changing. The earth is changing. All right, so we need to be able, you can't really expect humans to evolve too much. We are, but the animals have to make changes with these changing climates. And if you are wind up without these green areas, it's just not going to be able to work. So with the developers and the resource extractors not supporting this idea, they don't want even 13%. We just said that on the last slide. We want to think about the complexities of this issue. Do you see these spots? This is the whole earth, okay? These little bits of green, this is nice up here. They told everybody to stay off this island up here. And the blue is water areas that are protected. We're going to talk about more aquatic stuff in the later chapters, later lessons. But this is all we got, okay? We've only got 13%. The total surface of the area of Earth is 197 million square miles. Only 13% of that, which is 66 million, is saved. 66 million square, oh, that's kilometers, 25 million miles. All right, this area is about 7 times the size of the U.S. If you look at U.S., see, look, do you guys have ever seen maps like this? Look, the U.S. is this size. You do know that Africa is 3 times the size of the United States, right? Most maps don't show you it that way. That is the truth. Africa is 3 times the size of the United States. But if you're looking at it, if you consider all these lands, it's not a lot, okay? The question is, what do you think More land should or should not be set aside for protection? Again, there's no wrong answer here. You just got to answer, okay? Because it's yes or no. Mark, which one do you think? Okay. Now, here's our summary. The managed parks face many threats, including, again, we've got our list, illegal poaching and logging, high volume of tourists, the spread of invasive species, and the decline of native species. Sustaining this biodiversity requires more protection of the existing parks and nature reserves, as well as the remaining undisturbed land areas. Creating buffer zones, as we talked about, are a way to protect the reserves while allowing local people to meet the daily living needs. All right. So think back through, watch back anything you need to watch, and I'll see you when we talk about the next one. Bye, y'all.